Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today is our 'Twas the Night Before Christmas special. We'll be looking at two Christmas classics, one a little more classic than the other, I think. And also looking at about 5 Christmas episodes of some popular sitcoms and kind of talking about the real world versus the TV world of the sitcom. So first, we're going to start out with a review of Miracle on 34th Street. You're all probably very familiar with it, but if you're not, in this Christmas classic, an old man going by the name of Kris Kringle fills in for an intoxicated Santa in Macy's annual Thanksgiving Day parade. Kringle proves to be such a hit that he is soon appearing regularly at the chain's main store in Midtown Manhattan. When Kringle surprises customers and employees alike by claiming that he really is Santa Claus, it leads to a court case to determine his mental health and, importantly, his authenticity. This was written and directed by George Seaton, who is a filmmaker I don't have any real familiarity with. He directed a lot of like smaller movies. He directed like some Doris Day movies. The movie Airport, which Airplane is a parody of, he directed. And this was not my first time seeing Miracle on 34th Street. I think I've seen it a couple times before. This was your first time, Ariana.
Yes, it was my first time.
So I'm very interested for you to answer this question.
Okay.
Is Kris Kringle really Santa?
They kind of leave it vague with a hint of a maybe towards the end. That's the way that I interpret it.
I would come down hard going, he is not Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Because the movie never provides us with a single piece of evidence to show us that he is.
Except when they go into the house at the end and his cane is there.
A cane is there.
Yeah.
I do not know if that is his cane.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of canes in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the cane he has is not a one-of-a-kind cane.
No, it seems like pretty like basic.
Yeah. So even the ending of the movie isn't definitive. And that's one of the things I like about the movie is it is a movie about a lack of evidence. Now, this is a movie that's beloved by evangelical Christians.
I was thinking.
Yeah. Why would you think that? Why would you think that?
Leave common sense behind and just believe.
But I think while that has been a reading of the film, I actually don't believe that is what the film is about. For me, I think the film's end message about belief and faith does feel kind of muddled, but I think it can be read as not embracing anti-rationalism, which is what evangelical Christianity is, like discard the rational. But I think it's asking people to allow themselves to imagine possibilities. And for me, that comes from Kris Kringle's very staunch anti-capitalist mindset.
Yeah.
And that's shown in the movie and when he is working as the in-store Santa. There are parents who are telling him not to tell their children he can get them gifts because Macy's doesn't have it. Well, Kris Kringle happens to know that Gimbel's or another store in town has it and recommends that those parents go there. And this is something that you would not do, right? You're Macy's Santa. You're supposed to get people to buy shit at Macy's. And so I think what it's kind of doing here, and we also kind of see through the character of Alfred, who's the young, he's like a stock boy who Kringle befriends.
Yeah.
And Alfred is Santa in his neighborhood, like in the Bronx or Brooklyn or wherever, even though he's like a teenager, essentially.
Yeah.
And he talks about how much joy he gets from being Santa for the kids. And that's, I think, the message of the movie is what Kris Kringle, because I think Kris Kringle, is a man with a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Where he has a delusion that he believes he's Santa. However, the film posits if that delusion leads him to merely being kind to people and trying to help others find their joy, what harm is he to the world then? What harm is there in letting him live in that delusion as long as he's cared for, he has a place to sleep? Because all he's done is essentially just adopt a very positive humanistic philosophy of living.
Yeah.
That involves him renaming himself, which you could say there's all kinds of religions in which you take on a new name, you adopt this philosophy, Uh, but the goal would be to be kind to the people in the world.
Yeah.
If he was Santa and all he was doing was promoting toys, as in that Netflix Claus movie, that movie for me was very weird because it did seem to be about making the kids be good by the promise of stuff. That's what the message of that animated movie was.
Yeah, it wasn't a good mix. It wasn't a good mix.
And in this movie, it's not really about the stuff. Like Natalie Wood's character, Susan, wants the house, not because she's greedy and wants a house, but she wants a place where she can play. She wants a place where her family can grow. Like that's what the house represents, is her wanting her mother to kind of get out of the rut that she's in and kind of embrace the joy of life a little more. Because you can tell that the character of Doris, played by Maureen O'Hara, she's a woman who's clearly very wounded by the experiences she's had.
Yeah.
And so she wants to imbue in her daughter, which is good, this sense of, self-worth. She's not going to fall for delusions or being tricked. She wants her daughter to have a good head on her shoulder. And I think then Kris Kringle's introduction is more to go, that's good, but she also needs to know how to play. And she has to know how to imagine, because she needs to be able to imagine a life for herself at some point. She needs to imagine like what can be capable of. Because I think the issue with what Doris is doing is that she is encouraging maturity in her daughter, but she's also limiting the way her daughter views herself in the world.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like Susan just comes off as this precocious child who, instead of like, she's in the second grade because she's in a progressive school, but she acts as if she's like already on the verge of 25 when she's supposed to be like 6 or 7 years old. And she doesn't know how to play.
I recall the Ralph the Movie Maker review of the film 9 Lives, where Kevin Spacey dies and is reincarnated as a cat. And I remember there's some like precocious little girl character, maybe like 10, 11 years old. And I remember Ralph's comment of, she talks like she fucks 5 guys a day. And that's the kind of thing where you're like, this kind of like, calm down. You're a child, okay? You don't need to be so mature.
Yeah.
I do say Natalie Wood's performance is a very good child performance.
Yeah, it is a good child performance.
But I love that she's so weird. That's what I love, the weirdness of Susan.
Yeah, I think like they added the touch of her chewing gum before going to bed and then putting the gum away. So the question is she chewing the same gum the whole entire time?
I think there's some implication of that.
And it's like, so she is restrictive on her candy intake of sorts, where it's like, this is where she's allowed to indulge. And then everything else, she's like a miniature adult. And like the side glances, her side glances were so good when
she has very good reactive acting.
Yes.
Yeah. I also thought like, wow, if they had made Addams Family earlier, she would have been a great Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because she has it's that way she carries herself, that kind of confidence.
Yes.
And it's also like, I've always felt like Natalie Wood was a really great actress.
Yeah.
And it was a tragedy that she died as young as she did, because I was always interested in what would an elderly Natalie Wood performance be like. That would be very interesting to see what she would have done. I would say the other 2 adults, Maureen O'Hara as Doris and then John Payne as Fred Gailey, are not quite as captivating to me. I eventually kind of got bored with them around the middle of the movie.
Yeah, they kind of almost in a way for a few minutes, like Doris just disappears.
Yeah, and it shifts to just kind of like Chris and Fred for a bit.
Yeah, and like the focus on, and it's just supposed to be like, oh, Fred is a guy who believes in this type of thing and believes that there should be like imagination. But he also happens to be a great lawyer.
Which is an interesting contrast, right? A lawyer everything is based on evidence.
Yeah.
But he's also someone who's willing to sort of give in to this fantasy of it.
So I would say that there's like 2 parts of this film. It is
Chris at Macy's.
Chris and Macy's, and then going to court, which I kind of enjoyed the court stuff, even though it was completely absurd.
Oh yeah.
Like
It was very good, decent comedy.
Yes, it was very much like as if they were going, okay, we're making this film for the family, so the adults don't feel too bad for their kids that know that Santa isn't a real thing. But now we're going to get to the point of the adults being very concerned about the idea of telling children through news outlets
That Santa isn't real.
And the reason I'm laughing is like the judge, for example, gets no kisses and hugs from his like
children,
his
or
grandchildren,
yeah,
because they've been reading
the papers.
And even his wife
Fake news judge.
Like the way his wife is like, of course they won't kiss you goodnight. Not when their grandfather is judging Santa Claus.
Which it introduced something where the conflict for them is, do they want a world where children don't believe in Santa?
Yeah.
And it's sort of, whether Chris is Santa or not, is it worth having a world where children don't believe in those things?
Like I love that even like the prosecution is even going like, I don't want to fucking do this.
Yeah.
Like, do you think I want to do this? And his wife, who he's having this discussion with, is kind of like, I wish I'd like I married a plumber or a butcher.
Well, the prosecutor's own son testifies as a witness in favor of Santa. Yeah.
That she just has this she has this piece of paper which is indicated that their son
was subpoenaed. Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, they just throw away any reality, which is supposed to be like, of course a child is not supposed to testify unless their parent permits it, but it's supposed to be like a shock that this child like came with his mother, was like, hey, I was subpoenaed, and it's just sitting there. And like how the father is kind of like, I refuse to tell my son at this moment that Santa Claus doesn't exist, because he's just sort of like, no, like I'm not gonna do that in the middle of a court case. And it's like also like this big honcho guy. I think he was the guy that was like in I Love Lucy,
was
one of the
neighbors. William Frawley.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's like
Fred.
there with a cigar, like telling the judge, you got to be careful. You got to be careful because, you'll never get reelected if you say that Santa Claus doesn't exist. Like you won't get, and it's just like this absurd thing that I feel like you would have to alternate that if you're going to make it today.
Well, I mean, I've never seen the 94 remake with, I think it's Richard Attenborough and Mara Wilson.
Yeah.
I'm not that keen on even sitting down and ever watching it, just because this is a movie where I just don't understand why you'd need to remake it. It's perfectly fine how it is.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised in the remake. They're kind of like, he is Santa Claus.
And that's what I would hate. I want that the story makes both possibilities open, because him not being Santa still doesn't make the message of the film irrelevant. It's still a movie about, we have to be able to imagine, and we have to be people who help other people find what makes them happy.
Yeah, because I think there's like that interesting moment that there is the psychologist of Macy's is the antagonist, right? And then there's another psychologist that has treated Kris Kringle in the past and explains he is harmless. All he wants to do is help people and make them feel good. And there's no reason to break this this illusion that he has, because he's never been violent to anybody. Like he's the one that's sort of like, every person lives with these ideas in their minds of what would make the world a better place. But the difference is he's trying to make the world a better place.
Well, and because he does commit an act of violence, which he strikes the Macy's store psychologist on the head. Yes. And that gets witnessed by Doris and her manager. And so
but he exaggerates like,
oh yeah, he plays it up.
And it's like it's him getting upset on behalf of Alfred, because Alfred is saying that, well, I can't play Santa Claus anymore because apparently I have some guilt inside of me and I don't know what it is. And
is this an anti therapy movie?
I don't think it is, because you have two therapists that are completely in the opposite ends.
Well, and the one who works for Macy's isn't licensed.
Yeah,
which is one of the things Chris brings up, is like, this guy doesn't even have his license to practice.
Yeah, and that's the reason why like he gets even mad. He's sort of like, who are you to say to people when you're not an actual like he's almost like saying, I've been with a psychologist. You're not good. You're hurting a 17-year-old boy who's trying to navigate his life and be a good person.
And I think the star for me of the movie is Edmund Gwenn, who plays Kris Kringle. He won Best Supporting Actor at the Academy Awards for this role and the Golden Globe. And I can see why. Like, no one else in the movie is as magnetic as he is. No one else in the movie is as warm and as charming as he is.
Yeah.
And whenever the movie wasn't focusing on him, that is when I started to get bored with the movie.
Yeah, because everyone else is kind of acting the way that actors do during that time, and he feels is the most genuine.
Like, he really felt that he authentically embraced this character and how this character would behave, so that whenever he like says something or he chastises a person or makes a correction, like he says it with a kind of authority that you would be like, yes, I would do what this man told me to do. Because I would, if Santa told me I shouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that, kind of a thing. There's a great moment for us when he's at Macy's and a little girl comes and sits on his lap. And he's told, and the woman with the girl says that she cannot speak English. She is a Dutch orphan. And the reason you're laughing is because she's an orphan as a result of World War II. You're a sick woman.
Yeah.
No, that's not the reason.
She's from Rotterdam.
She's from Rotterdam. Rotterdam, I think, was one of those cities that just got leveled in the war, which is why if you come to the Netherlands now and you go to Rotterdam, it is very different from all the other Dutch cities that did not get leveled. It does have like different architecture and things like that.
Yeah, it doesn't have as many canals.
Yeah, not as many canals and not as many old buildings as you'll find in like Amsterdam or like here in Leiden or The Hague. So the little girl does not speak English, and so she can only speak Dutch. Well, Chris responds in Dutch, and then the little girl responds. And there's two people who are currently learning Dutch and surrounded by that as a language. I would like to hear your thoughts on Marlene Leiden, funny enough, who played Dutch Girl. What were your thoughts on her performance speaking Dutch?
Here's the thing. If you are not used to hearing Dutch speakers, you would not pick it up.
I think you would. Because it's that kind of like Hollywood kid voice where like yeah, 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 yeah.
But it's there's only like a few Dutch words in there. It's just
it's all Dutch.
It's all Dutch, but I mean like
it's just not pronounced well at all.
Not pronounced well.
She's like,
and
ik wil een present voor de like Sinterklaas.
The thing is, like, it's supposed to be she's like telling him, I don't even want a present. I got what I wanted, indicating that she got adopted. She just wanted to see him.
I got a green card.
And it's just sort of like, oh, you're Santa Claus. And they start singing a Santa Claus song. And
it's a sweet moment.
Yeah.
But it is very funny how badly she speaks Dutch.
And it's just also like, this is the time that you could have found someone, like a child who actually spoke Dutch. And just had that moment, it's like
you would think, like, find the child of maybe Jewish immigrants there who maybe they did theater or something back in Europe, and you're like, hey, we need a Dutch kid. You could do that. But yeah, it is a horrendous line delivery for those of you who know how Dutch is supposed to be. Yeah. Now, would you consider? There's some people that consider A Miracle on 34th Street a courtroom drama. Do you think it meets the qualifications for that?
Oh boy!
Would you watch this as a double feature with 12 Angry Men?
Yes.
Why?
I mean, it is like at the end, it does become kind of a courtroom drama. Like it's like the main thing that is going on. We kind of like stop.
I'd say it's like the last half of the film.
Like we stop visiting Susan, and
we don't go back to Macy's anymore.
We don't go to Macy's, and it's just supposed to be like just all having to do with the courtroom. So it is a courtroom drama. Isn't it filmed in the same courtroom as 12 Angry
Men doesn't have many courtroom scenes.
No.
I think it's supposed to be set at the same courthouse.
Okay.
Which is, I guess, like the New York City courthouse. Yeah. I don't know the name of it. Because when they go outside, they're green screening, but you can tell that like it's those steps with the big pillars and everything that you see at the end of 12 Angry Men. Another question I had is, what is the miracle? And does it happen on 34th Street?
Yeah, what is a miracle?
That's
Is it at the house? Because the house shouldn't be.
The miracle's not on 34th Street though. 34th Street, I believe, is where Macy's is located.
That's I think that was also the weird thing for me about
Is there
this
even a
film.
miracle in this movie?
There isn't really a miracle. I think it's just like
or are we defining miracle too narrowly as supernatural?
Or maybe it's just supposed to be like he himself is the miracle that appeared. Because
That-
remember, like they were supposed to have like this really bad Santa Claus. He shows up, not only like covers for the parade, but then is like hired to be the Santa Claus in like Macy's, and then suddenly starts this weird goodwill thing between businesses, which is what a miracle that corporation.
The miracle might be that like these stores decided not to be in like cutthroat competition with each other. I don't know, maybe that's what it is. I'm also surprised when this came out. I'm like, wow, they didn't try to like blacklist Edmund Gwenn as a communist. So last year we watched It's a Wonderful Life. I think it was the first time I'd ever watched it the whole way through.
Yeah.
It was your first viewing as well. I didn't care for it because I don't really care for Frank Capra as a person. I think he was, thankfully he's dead. But I think it was much more of kind of a not a reactionary, but I think he was very conservative in a way that wasn't necessarily great.
Yeah.
There's things in It's a Wonderful Life that I like messages about community. It's just way too long. It overstays its welcome because the part that everybody remembers is like the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And I get like why you need George Bailey's life, but maybe we could have done a few more edits. You have It's a Wonderful Life. You have Miracle on 34th Street. Which are you picking of those two?
Miracle on.
And why are you picking that?
It is much more entertaining to watch.
It's only 140 minutes.
Yeah,
it's only an hour and 40 minutes.
It's only an hour and 40 minutes. And also just Edmund Gwenn like just sells it. Like you want to keep watching him.
And I think Jimmy Stewart's good in It's a Wonderful Life, but he's not great. We will be talking a little later about a movie and where I was with Jimmy Stewart where I just was like, wow, now I get it. Yeah. Now I get why people love Jimmy Stewart. But yeah, Miracle on 34th Street was a fun movie. I do think it holds up. I don't know if it's a movie that I would sit kids in front of. I think kids are going to get bored.
Yeah.
And it's not because the movie's bad. It's just that middle chunk is so slow and you lose the Chris part of it. You don't get enough of him.
Yeah.
And it becomes all these conversations. Like they introduce a bunch of new characters because of the court thing.
Yeah. And the thing is like the courtroom stuff that would only be engaging for like maybe a 10 or 11-year-old. 12, you're going to start to lose them a little. Because they're gonna be, it's like a stupid baby film.
It just becomes cynical at that point.
But it's just, yeah, 12-year-olds are super cynical.
These bitter, cynical 12-year-olds, jaded.
It's such good, like, comedic reaction, like, acting there with the eyes really wide or the side glancing or the little huffs. Because
you know who I would have loved to have directed this movie?
Who?
Preston Sturges.
Blank.
Of course. Sullivan's Travels. The Palm Beach Story.
Yeah.
He did all those like screwball comedies.
Yes.
Because those actors, like the courtroom actors, have the vibe of his like troupe of players he would put in all his movies. And I just feel like, man, if Preston Sturges had done this, and you think about Sullivan's Travels, it was able to have heart. There's that scene in like the black church where the prisoners come in, they watch like a Disney cartoon. And so Sturges was still a sentimental person. He just knew how to do comedy really well and satire. And this feels like a movie that needed a little bit more refinement of its satire, kind of mocking corporations and the sort of materialistic greed of Christmas and the way it had become. But yeah, I think I would have been interested in Preston Sturges' Miracle on 34th Street.
Yeah.
Maybe one day when time machines are invented, we can go back and kill George Seaton and then get Preston Sturges to do this.
The other thing that I remember that you mentioned, and I've never seen this film fully. I've only seen maybe the first like 10 minutes.
I've always seen like the beginning and the end.
No, I mean like Elf.
Oh,
you said that a lot of people like connect it to Elf.
I don't think a lot of people do. I was connecting it to Elf because it's a fish out of water story about someone who claims to be something that all these other people don't believe, and it's in New York City. And at the end of the movie, it's like, no, he really like. But with Elf, it's so on the nose that it's like he is an elf and Santa is real.
Yeah.
But then I think this works better because of the subtlety about it, where I don't know, Kris Kringle could be Santa, or he could just be a man who is delusional, but it's a happy, kind delusion to have.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I like the ambiguity. I love Edmund Gwenn. I think Natalie Wood gives a great child actor performance.
Mhm.
And I would say I think it's a movie worth checking out. Alfred Kralik and Clara Novak are employees at Matuszek and Company, a general store in Budapest. Clara and Alfred are constantly at odds with each other, butting heads and disagreeing on almost everything. Both are enamored of their respective pen pals, who serve as welcome distractions in their lives. Little do they know, they are each the other's pen pal, and despite outward differences, have unwittingly fallen in love through their letters. This is Ernst Lubitsch's The Shop Around the Corner. Ariana, I'd never seen a movie by Ernst Lubitsch.
Mhm.
It's a name I've heard. I've heard of this movie. You've Got Mail is a remake of this film. And this year when I was reading Hollywood, an oral history, I noticed that Ernst Lubitsch in this sort of early period of Hollywood, people kept bringing his name up as what a great director, what a great comedy director, what a great filmmaker. And I thought, oh, when I saw this was a Christmas movie, and we'll talk about how Christmassy it is, which is one of the reasons I like it. This was like, they said, you have to see this movie, The Shop Around the Corner. So, what did you think of this film?
I thought it was a very good film.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's some stuff that I would have loved more on, but like it is a focus on uh the male character, which I don't remember his name right now.
Alfred.
Alfred, played by James Stewart. Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, pre-Jimmy.
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 That just sounds weird. I don't like it. It's a pretty charming film. Love the fact that he's supposed to be Hungarian, even though it's not.
Oh yeah, the film
reflected.
set in Budapest. I think they're all supposed to be Hungarian, and barely anyone has an accent.
Nope.
Yeah,
Like the clothing is clearly American, everything.
but everyone's names are so like they're clearly not like Anglo-Saxon kind of English derived
more
names.
like European names.
Yeah, we're like so that Eastern European kind of thing. Yeah.
But like I like the dynamic of the shop. I like the introduction where we're not really like there's not a lot of exposition given. You have to interpret what is happening. Especially as everyone is waiting for the shop owner to come in. Because at the beginning I was just like, oh, is like
I thought they were customers.
I thought it was like Jimmy Stewart that was like the main guy. Because the way that everybody regarded him once he came towards the door.
And that is part of the movie, kind of, is that while he isn't the owner and manager, he is kind of pulling a lot of the weight of the store.
Yes.
I would agree with you. I was not prepared for how goddamn good this movie is. And it's one of those where it's just good on every level.
Yeah.
And you think of 1940, I have a certain sense of what I feel when I look at movies from that time period. And this film transcends all of that. It is so mature in the way it handles its story and its characters. There are no cheap laughs in this movie. Every joke is very like clever and thought out, and the characters are developed really well.
Yeah.
So that everyone, even like someone like Pepe, who is clearly kind of supposed to be a comedy relief, feels like a very multi-dimensional character. Like there's more to him than you would get in most movies.
Yeah, he feels realistic.
And this film gets cited a lot by modern comedy filmmakers, but they are all falling far short of like the mark this movie set.
Yeah, as someone who watched You Got Mail a lot of times because it is one of my mother's favorite films. It just falls so short in comparison to this film.
Like embarrassing.
Yeah, because I think it is embarrassing because at the least like in this film when Alfred comes to the point that he realizes that he is most likely in love with this pen pal, he does not know that it is Clara, but he asks his coworker, hey, how do you survive with your pension and your family?
Was that Pirovich?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's like, how do you do? And Perovich is like, well, we don't make I don't make a lot, but it is doable. And he's like, well, if I get a raise, it'll probably be better. Like he's already making plans of sorts, assuming that this woman will be physically to his attraction and that they will have that chemistry once they hit it off. Um versus You Got Mail is a huge, Barnes and Noble / Borders ripoff, Fox and Something taking over a small corporate, like small bookstore that eventually does end up buying her out, and she ends up losing her, like, the store that she's known her entire life. And they both already have partners while they're having this relationship online with each other. Like in this one, it's not as if like Alfred has a girl on the side. He's just been focusing on work.
Yeah.
Like
Which is what led him to do this whole like personal ad in the newspaper thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something that like he wants to go through with it, and then having to go through with the fact that like his boss is treating him differently. I like the fact that we discover that the boss has been treating him differently for months.
Mhm.
Because at first I was like, oh, it's only been a few weeks, but they're just like, oh no, Miss Novak's been here for 6 months. So it means like the boss has been treating him weird for 6 months. And now they're like going to confront it. The whole like B plot line that's happening with the boss, that's kind of heartbreaking.
His wife.
Yeah. And the fact that we never see the wife, but she's implied, especially through Peppy, because Peppy's like,
He always answers the phone and talks to her. Yeah.
then he's constantly running errands for her, and he's like, it doesn't make sense. I'm supposed to be the errand boy for the store, and she's sending me to go get packages for her. It was just, it's so sweet in comparison to the remake.
Well, I liked how somebody referred to it. They said it's both wholesome while feeling very authentic in its conflicts.
Yes.
That the conflicts between these humans feel like the real conflicts we experience in our lives with coworkers and bosses and things like that. And the sort of struggle to make enough money to keep going, like in the case of like Pirovich, who's a older man with children and a wife who doesn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the reasons that Alfred and Clara end up not liking each other as coworkers, it all feels very real.
Yeah.
Which I think is so interesting because we're so used to Hollywood films, and I would say even back in that period too, of having this sort of sense of being heightened reality.
Yeah.
What I loved about this is it didn't feel heightened.
No.
Like I would say this has the vibe of like a really good character-driven A24 drama.
Yeah, I think this is a type of like, this is the romantic comedies that you can if you were to show it to someone who hates romantic comedies, this could maybe turn them around.
Yeah.
As someone
And
who
yeah, I am someone who does not like romantic comedies, but I was introduced to that genre in the 90s.
Yes.
But now that I've gone back and watched something like Bringing Up Baby with Grant and Hepburn, or I've watched this with, James Stewart, I'm like, oh, these are really good movies.
Yeah,
I really like
and
these.
and it's this weird thing. It's like it kind of breaks my heart when I think about like movies and romance, on how there is a sort of buildup that's coming through, because there are, like, for example, queer love stories that are coming up that are far more interesting and showing like the good and the bad side of relationships, like Normal People, which was like very dramatic, but also like it ends up that they two made each other better.
Well, just kind of more like television is where you're finding these types of stories.
Yes.
Like theatrical films, like are garbage. Like I thought of that Cha-Cha Real Smooth, that movie with Dakota Johnson that came out last year, which is a romantic comedy, right? But it
Sorry, I'm laughing at like Cooper.
Yeah, the director, writer, star, where it's just he casts himself in the lead role and he feels so inauthentic to me in that movie. It feels like someone who's trying to project a false sense of who they are. Well, James Stewart in Shop Around the Corner, it just feels effortless. It just feels like this is that guy.
Yeah.
And you have Margaret Sullivan, who she's not going over the top with her performance. It's very naturalistic. It's not restrained, but it's also not trying to be too goofy. And one of the horrible tropes I hate in like especially modern romantic comedies is the clumsy woman trope.
Yeah.
It's so dumb and lazy, and it's like that's the only way you can make your character charming. Why don't you just write her better, and then you can have someone who's charming by what they say and what they do rather than, oh, look, she fell down the
Well, I
stairs.
did like the interesting thing about this is that with Clara is kind of a jerk.
Yeah, like I was saying, you understand why they don't like each other.
Like the thing is, like what's supposed to be is Alfred is a little bit more serious. He's trying to make sure that the store doesn't buy anything that's like that would be hard to sell and that like would bring them no benefit. And Clara at the end is a good salesperson who can sell anything. But it bothers him because he's like, I don't want, like, she can sell the cheap stuff so well, but it bothers me because it's like, I don't want us to sell the cheap stuff. I don't want to buy the ones that have the bad glue and the like the fake leather and say it's all good and that like if it breaks in 2 weeks, it's not our fault. And like Clara is doing it because like she needs money. She needs to take like they're talking about the fact that losing a job during that time in the film was a horrendous thing. They're going through a depression of on their own. They're kind of like, if you don't have a job, then you don't have food on the table. You don't have you can't pay the rent.
Because that what brings her into the shop is she's desperate for work.
And he butts heads with her. And the fact that like through his letters, like she is supposed to be like this intellectual that he's falling in love with. But like I do like the flip of a coin of showing that like yes she's intelligent and because she's intelligent she can be so fucking mean because she knows where to like to needle in to make it really bad.
But she's also like because of her intelligence she's probably been and also because she's a woman she's been burnt by men in the past, so she kind of has her hackles up. Yes. And the minute she detects bullshit from a guy, she's like, I'm not going to take this.
And the thing is, like, it makes it much more interesting because, like, in You Got Mail, it's supposed to be like Tom Hanks is meaner than, Meg Ryan. And Meg Ryan it only gets mean in, like, when she gets defensive or when she's picked on. And, like, Clara Novak is kind of, like, just doing shit because she just sort of like I don't want to do what Alfred tells me to do, and she's only nice to him when she wants something from him, even though she later admits like yes she does have an admiration about it. And when he also realizes who she is, he's kind of like, can I bring out the person in the letter that she is? And it does come out, and he's sort of like, oh, so she's not a liar, she is who she says she is. I do also like the fact that like in this film they're not like a super attractive couple. They are good.
Well, like everybody in the film just looks kind of like regular people.
Yeah. And it makes the story even more enticing of sorts because
what feels relatable. You're like, oh, I've worked with people that look and act like this.
Yeah, and like it's also but this interesting thing like where he starts picking on her a little bit when he knows who she is. Well, the guy came in that wrote the letter and he's a little like chubby and she's kind of like, oh, I can deal with that. And he was like, oh, but don't put him on a diet. But then like he switches over when he realizes, oh, she doesn't like she seems a little concerned about what his weight will be, but it's even more she gets enraged at the idea that this fake person that he's assuming is her pen pal is concerned about how much money she makes because he doesn't want to work. And that's when she gets really upset because she's kind of like, what? And she's not even saying she wants to be with someone who's not working.
She just wants someone that isn't going to exploit her.
Yeah, and she's kind of like, but he didn't tell me in the letters that he didn't have a job. Like, I had to work myself, like, get this job. Like, what do you mean he doesn't have a job? And it's an interesting thing because he's like testing her, even though
like he's trying to see where her integrity lies.
Yes.
And it's and I love that the moment that she realizes who he is and they get together is literally like the last moment of the movie, and then the movie just ends.
Yeah.
And I like because it leaves it open-ended. We don't know. Maybe they will work out, maybe they won't.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think is one of the good themes of the movie is it's about seeing who people are and telling you that's going to involve distancing yourself from your immediate perceptions about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that people are complicated. People aren't just one thing. So when you meet someone, and even if you spend considerable time around them, if you only ever see them in one context, you don't really know who they are.
Yeah.
You think about people you've worked with, and then there might come a chance where you see them outside of work at some point, and you suddenly have a different picture of who you are. What might be positive, might be negative, but you start to get a better idea of the dimensionality of people. And I really like that. The performance I think that is up there with Stewart and Sullivan is Frank Morgan as Mr. Matichek, the boss.
Yeah.
Who, as soon as I saw him, you remember me saying, I knew it was. I said, it's the Wizard of Oz. He played Professor Marvel, who Dorothy meets when she runs away from home, and then eventually plays the wizard inside Oz. And I don't know if I'd ever seen him in another movie outside of that until this. He is really good. I thought he was going to be over the top comedy relief kind of character,
Yeah.
and he is not at all.
No, like the scenes that need him to act accordingly, he acts accordingly too. And then when the drama hits, it makes perfect sense as to why he's playing the character the way he is.
And then he gets really good, like, emotional beats in the film. There's an attempted suicide scene,
Yeah.
which also, the way they choose to shoot that is so smart. And I think because of like the Hays Code at the time, you couldn't show him putting a gun to his head.
Or in his mouth.
And so the way they film around that, but they still communicate that information, and how, somebody comes across him and stops him from doing it. But all of that happens off screen.
Yeah.
All you see is a light bulb shatter from what we can assume was a gunshot.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole character of Mr. Matichek is so good and goes through so much in his emotions and relationship with Alfred.
Yes.
Like, the conflict between those two is done so well, where it goes from this kind of father-son relationship to this horrible, like, abandonment.
Yeah.
Like, betrayal.
And like, I think it even, what I like, the reason that it ends up stinging more is that you don't find out how long he's worked with this man.
But it feels like long.
And like, but no, you do find out, like, because someone is like, but he's been here for 9 years.
Yeah.
He's like, and like, you brought him in. Like,
yeah, he's like the only employee that's been here longer than anyone else.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like, he is your apprentice. Like, you don't just,
like, he was clearly being groomed to be the head of the company. And then when the betrayal happens,
yes,
you, like, for Alfred, like, Stewart plays it so well, of just like this sense of like apoplectic betrayal.
Yeah, and I like the thing that even before that happened, it's supposed to be a conversation that the two of them are having. It's the moment like Miss Novak is hired. It's supposed to be that he's asking all his employees, what do you think about this box? And everyone is saying yes, except Alfred. And
it's a cigar box, right?
Yes, it's a cigar box. And it's sort of like, my favorite is what is Pirovich. Every time he's like, I just want your honest opinion, Pirovich just disappears.
Because he's wise enough to go, when the boss says, I want your honest opinion, he doesn't really want your honest opinion.
And the only honest opinion he really wants is Alfred's honest opinion.
Yes. And it's that, and that's part of the betrayal, is he believes that Alfred has not been honest with him.
Yeah.
And that was the quality of Alfred's that he appreciated the most.
Yes.
And so it's one of those where there's no villain in this movie. It's just people not having all of the information and jumping to conclusions and misunderstanding, and how tragic that is, because you destroy relationships as a result of that. It is a Christmas movie. It is clearly Christmas in the movie.
Yeah, it starts like the day after Thanksgiving.
in Budapest, which is a holiday they celebrate.
Well, I actually think it was like way earlier because they also imply like that Miss Novak.
By the end of the movie, it's Christmas time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I was gonna say is I love that the movie doesn't make Christmas a part of the theme. It's part of the setting.
Yes.
So in the background, there's Christmas decorations up, there's trees, there's snow. But the film doesn't talk about Santa. You don't see people giving presents. And as a result, it feels like a movie that fits the themes and lessons of Christmas far more than a lot of other movies, where it is about this kind of openness to mankind and not being quick to judge people.
Yeah.
I also feel like the cinematography in this movie
the lighting is so
insane.
They had
like
the setting as an art.
I couldn't believe how good this movie looked, and it was one of the first times where I've been able to look at a movie and I was like, oh, Martin Scorsese really studied Ernst Lubitsch's work. I can tell in the way this camera moves, the way this scene is lit, that this is one of his big influences. I have not looked it up yet, but I will not be surprised when I Google it and it's like Scorsese Lubitsch.
Yeah, beautiful shot that it almost seems like they did different lighting for each character, and it's supposed to be Clara Novak and then Alfred Kralik sitting side by side, and she almost has a smudge of softness on her, just a little, not too like it's barely noticeable, and then he has a little bit of a crisper like lighting, but it's done such a subtle way because I think it's supposed to be he has more lighting and then she's a little bit like softer.
Yeah, the director really feels like he's in control of all those visual elements and using them in the storytelling.
And it's understanding that it's sort of like it's a mixture of really well done like stage lighting and movie quality lighting, and how like, yeah, if we're gonna convey the evening, it has to be this type of lighting because there's not going to be as bright because the sun isn't coming in, and they're also in the storage room, so it needs to look a certain way. And then the shots in the storage room, because we have them like going up and down stairs or sitting closer to certain areas, so it looks way more dramatic at times.
Well, like the big finale is the store's closed and all the lights are off, and so it almost kind of like spotlights them and makes the background just disappear. We're sort of like, now we're going to focus on them because nothing else in this story matters. We've resolved all these other characters. We're not even going to talk about the store anymore. We want to focus on Alfred and Clara and how this story resolves. Yeah, like you were saying, the lighting is so good. I think a lot of times you'll look at old movies like this and the lighting kind of feels like washed out, or it's like not lit, or something with the film didn't go right.
Because then they put that weird gloss for when the woman's there and then the guy's there, and then when they're together it just kind of like throws you off.
And this felt very naturalistic.
Yes. And
so everything was very crisp, and you could see every detail. Like fabric textures looked really good. Wood grain looked really good in the movie.
It made you actually like appreciate, for example, like Mr. Vardas is supposed to have these lavish, elegant,
his fur coat,
like dresses, and it's like he looks like straight lines on his as attire.
But then like it's a film that has this really like palpable texture where it felt like you could feel the fur on his coat, or you could feel like the grain of the wood on a shelf.
Feel how worn
Pirovich's
clothes were, because he was a little like older
and wearing like ragged clothes,
more like poor. Like he still wore like elegant stuff, but it was not as streamlined as Mr. Varda's clothes.
Well, it's the first time, because I would consider like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind a romantic comedy.
Yes.
And I feel like that was the most visually interesting romantic comedy I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
This does not go in the same kind of Michel Gondry like wild places. But in terms of like a visually rich and strong romantic comedy, this is like top tier.
Yeah, there's like a really good shot of like Hugo / Frank Morgan, like
Mr. Matacek,
when he's at the entrance of the store, and and he's looking around, and it's sort of like from afar, and then you do an up close, and like it's just the different textures. Like he has a flower like pinned to like his jacket, like this crisp whiteness of his shirt, like the tie, where it makes sense that he would own this place
hmm
because it's all a reflection of his style and what he likes. And then like just it does feel like a play at times because there's so many
What is
people.
it's based on a play, yeah.
Yeah.
You got it. And it has that kind of like most things happen at the store.
Yeah.
And so you have that kind of setting. And this being the first Ernst Lubitsch film I've seen, I'm in. Like I want to watch more. I know he directed the original Heaven Can Wait,
Mhm.
which I've seen the Warren Beatty remake of, which is fine. But now I'm much more interested to see what Lubitsch's version looked like. He directed a film To Have and Have Not, which is about a troupe of actors in Nazi-occupied Poland. That is a film whose title has always come up, and I've heard good things about it. Like I want to watch that in 2024. This is a director where it makes me happy because sometimes when you watch so many films, as I just watched my, according to Letterboxd, 4,000th film of my life, you get to the point where you start to feel like, I've kind of seen the good stuff. But I love now that I'm going back into these eras that when I was younger, I don't think I had the maturity to appreciate it
Okay.
because these are movies where this feels like someone who's really lived life telling you a story about people.
Yeah.
And now having lived more life, I can get more out of it. And so, yeah, it has me excited to discover, a director who's been long dead and he died of a heart attack in 1947, 7 years after this movie, at the age of 55. So not a very old man. Uh, but that there's this body of work that I can like dip into and discover great movies and see visuals that rival things today. And it's just, I wish that Hollywood were making movies that felt like this now. Like,
Yeah.
think about how nice that would be to go to a theater and see a movie that felt like this. It wasn't just a remake of this with sort of modern sensibilities, but it has the modern sensibilities, but it also has that level of craft and care that Lubitsch is putting into it. I know he started in the 19 teens in Germany and then eventually came to the US. He was an Ashkenazi Jew. And after visiting the States and seeing the level of production going on in Hollywood, he saw that this was a higher level than what he was able to do in Germany. So he emigrated. And then there was a list that was published, I think, in like the late 60s in this comprehensive kind of like encyclopedia of directors and their films. And one of the things the author did was name the 14 core directors of American cinema, and Lubitsch is on the list. And I can see why a lot of people who make romantic comedies go back to the Lubitsch well. None of them are doing it well. That's the
Yeah.
thing. They're not doing it as good as he did. So there's something about his work that you're missing. And I think it might be that visual element and the human element. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want your characters to be living cartoons. I want your characters to be people. I want the situations to feel authentic. That's what's going to get me to enjoy your romantic comedy more because it's going to feel like something that really happens to people. But yeah, excellent film. If you have not seen The Shop Around the Corner, you highly recommend this be added to your Christmas viewing. One of the key ways that has shaped, I think, the way I see Christmas was watching lots of television as a child. When we think of Christmas, we think of Christmas specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Charlie Brown Christmas, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. I always loved the California Raisins Christmas,
Okay.
where it was all Will Vinton, I think his name is, who's the stop motion animator who did that, and it was very good. I remember it being very good at the time. But then your television sitcom will also have Christmas episodes. And so we sat down and watched 5 of these episodes and are just going to kind of talk about them in generally. This won't be like at Halloween where we kind of gave each episode its own segment. We're just going to talk about them together and things that stood out. So what we watched it was the I Love Lucy Christmas episode from 1956. Happy Days, their second season Christmas episode, Guess Who's Coming to Christmas? Mary Tyler Moore Show's first Christmas episode, Christmas and the Hard Luck Kid 2. Cheers, and I think it was sometime in like 85, 86, which was called Christmas Cheers. The Golden Girls, which I believe this was in the late 80s, maybe like 87, 88, 89, somewhere in there. Have Yourself a Very Little Christmas. And so first of all, Ariana, what did you think of these episodes? Is there any one of them that stands out to you as that you enjoyed it more than the others?
I mean, unfortunately, there isn't anything that you'd be thinking it's very spectacular in any of these episodes that we watched. I feel like the only episode that was trying was the Golden Girls, and where they remarked about like having gone to a homeless shelter to give food on Christmas, and they're concerned about what happens when Christmas is no longer there and how do these people feed themselves. And they kind of like touch on Reaganomics without really saying Reaganomics.
Oh, I think somebody says Ronald Reagan at
Yes,
some
they
point.
do.
Yeah.
And so
It was at least trying to comment about the Christmas that was happening at the moment.
yes. And how they're kind of like, you shouldn't just only care about feeding these people during special events. That it's unfair to do that, because what about what happens to them after the holidays are done?
Like, where are they going to eat tomorrow?
Yes. Other than that, a lot of them were kind of lackluster.
Yep.
I really kind of expected more from I Love Lucy beyond just being a clip.
Yeah, it ended up just being a clip show, but it was also the episode where Little Ricky, or no, I was thinking that's the clip where Little Ricky is born. The I Love Lucy episode, what's interesting to me is it includes a trope that I think we saw show up in some of these others, and we see show up a lot in media, which is the Santa is real trope.
Yeah, I don't know if they did that in the Golden Girls, did they?
They didn't. I think they did that. That was in Cheers.
Yeah.
They certainly did it. I don't know about the other episodes here that we watched, but I know that's a thing I remember from watching sitcoms as a kid, is an old man with a white beard or some weird coincidence, and it would be, oh, Santa's real. Because, of course, they have children watching these shows, and so they can't say Santa's not real to the kids. That wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I would say the Golden Girls was a strong standout for me. I liked, as you were saying, the focus on the giving back to the poor. I think the comedic writing of the Golden Girls is very good. Those four actresses have such perfect chemistry
Even the
together.
performance, because at some point Blanche tells Rose something about how much she sweats, and like Rose touches her forehead briefly, and it's just like it's the delivery and it's the chemistry that they all had with each other that really sells it.
In other moments, Betty White is so, I mean, they're all good. I do love when Betty White, because she always tells her stories about St. Olaf, the town in Minnesota, I think she's from. And when she tells this story about how they would bring the farm animals into the houses during the winter,
and then they would have too much eggnog, and then they would.
But then, like, everything is implied, but the implication is they're fucking the animals during the winter.
Like it's like everybody would have too much eggnog, and then they would look at each other and go, "What the heck?"
Yeah.
And one thing would lead to another, and then like.
Well, I think Rue McClanahan is so good at reacting. Like she has two great faces. Her shocked, disgusted face, and then her like annoyed face are so good. And it's her bouncing off of Betty White. Like those two they have such a good comedic dynamic between the two of them. Because then like it's a show where you do kind of have two separate comedic dynamics then cross over. You have the and I don't know their names, Blanche and what's Betty White's character's name? Rose. Blanche and Rose are kind of a comedy duo, and then Sophia and Dorothy are a comedy duo. But then there's intersection. I love the conversation they have about how much they hate Rose's gifts.
Yes.
And so they also don't want to buy a lot of presents this year, so they just draw names out of a hat, but everyone's terrified they're gonna get Rose. And then as they're drawing their names and they don't get Rose, the audible like, oh thank God. And Rose is oblivious, and then it becomes very clear that Blanche is gonna have no option because Rose draws her own name. And Dorothy's just like, well, you can't draw your own name, and you see Blanche being like, please God, no, I don't want it. But then she gets like a really good gift.
Yeah, she gets her a nice blouse.
Was there any catch to that gift?
It was like, yes, Dorothy said to get you something crotchless.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. But yeah, Golden Girls, really well written. What did you think of I guess I don't know if it's the main plot would be between Dorothy and her ex-husband.
I thought it was okay. I mean, I had no real like connection to it because I haven't really watched. I mean, I watched some episodes of Golden Girls. I never really followed the whole way through. It was that time when you had cable, you would just watch it sporadically and everything was out of
Like
order.
TV Land or
Yeah.
TBS or something. Yeah.
Well, more like Lifetime. Lifetime
Oh yeah, they
did
did do Golden Girls. Yeah. Like I assumed if you were watching Lifetime in December back in the 90s or the early 2000s, Golden Girls marathon
Yeah.
because it was easy programming. You just put a bunch of episodes on. But yeah, Golden Girls was good. What did you think? We talked a little bit about I Love Lucy. I want to go back to that because you have never really watched much I Love Lucy.
No.
I remember watching it when I was very young in like the late 80s. When I look at it now, it does feel like a proto sitcom, kind of like The Honeymooners,
Yeah.
where it's creating the tropes and story ideas that are going to be used forever now.
Yes.
And so it feels very primitive in that way.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was a clip show, so we're watching clips
Yeah.
of other episodes.
But then the clips we're seeing, the how they're Ricky and Fred and Ethel, and they're preparing for Lucy to go to the hospital.
Yes, that was my favorite one.
That was the best clip.
It was the best clip.
But it was like, I feel like I saw stuff like that in Laverne and Shirley, which they clearly draw from Lucille Ball. I feel like I saw things like that in all sorts of female-driven sitcoms to come after.
Yeah, especially like when she tries to tell Ricky that she's pregnant and she has to do it in the middle of his show.
Yeah.
So she sends a note being like, "Can you sing 'We're having a baby' because my husband doesn't know." So he's going to each and every couple like, "Is
The
it
Paul
you?"
Anka song where
Yeah.
she's having a baby. Yeah.
And then like ends up like looking at her and he's like, "Oh, I'm having the baby."
And it's a lot of those like double takes.
Yes.
So it's vaudeville coming to television, but then them also trying to turn it into something because you're featuring a pregnant woman. That's something that has never been done on television until this point. But yeah, I Love Lucy. Okay. I certainly don't think this was like the best episode to judge I Love Lucy by. In the same way, like even the Golden Girls episode is not the best to judge it by because it's still saddled with this Christmas element that everything about the story has to work around. Yeah. They do a great job with that as the task.
Yeah, I feel like by watching the I Love Lucy stuff and then finding out that, for example, her father was a communist and she was part of the Communist Party, it just is a staunch reminder to me on how liberals will take something that you love and fucking ruin it.
Because the Aaron Sorkin I Love Lucy movie.
How many times has he taken something that's socialist and then fucked it up for everybody else?
I mean, I think that's his whole career.
Did he do like a court drama about like people who were socialists that like were making fun of the fact that they were in court? And
it was like the Weather Underground, yeah.
And he made it into like a serious liberal thing. At
the
end of the
where
day,
the FBI was like a good guy or something. So Happy Days, it was from the second season, and it was still when I always forget his name, Chuck Cunningham, the oldest Cunningham child
before he was cut out of their life.
I think he just basically gets like tagged and bagged and taken to Guantanamo Bay, and so they mind wipe them. But one thing, and I remember watching Happy Days religiously as a kid. It was on, I think, like one of the local channels that wasn't even an affiliate at the time.
Yeah.
In just reruns. And I don't remember this as a kid, but watching the episode now, because in season 2, they're still doing like single camera.
Yeah.
Where it's still being shot more cinematically than it is like a 3-camera sitcom. It's so fast paced.
Yeah.
The edits were so fast in that show.
So I understand why they would end up going with the 3-camera sitcom thing after seeing the editing, because it was getting to the point
there's no room to breathe.
Like I was just like, is the editor the same one that did the Queen movie, like the one of like the band Queen or whatever?
Oh yeah.
It was like every 3 to 2 seconds there was a cut.
It reminded me of Archie comics where you have those like 1-page things where it's like all a gag, because it would be like, oh, the Cunninghams are at the breakfast table, there's this banter, Joni says something that's the punchline, and it goes and then that does like a transition, and now we're at Al's Diner and Richie's sitting with Potsy and Ralph Mouth, and there's a whole thing where there's a joke there. Yeah.
It's one thing when you watch something that is set in the 80s and like misogyny is rampant. It's another one that it's like in the 1950s where everyone's always like, this is a wholesome time. Yet here's this guy trying to force himself on one of the waitresses to make out with her. And we're supposed to like be like,
Aren't these boys so incorrigible?
especially it's like you're under the mistletoe. It's just like that's just a piece of broccoli.
So what you're saying is they need to do like with the Fresh Prince and make a modern grim and gritty Happy Days where it's like what was really going on in the 50s. So it was an episode that was very Fonzie centric.
Yeah.
As many of those episodes were. What was your opinion of Mr. Arthur Fonzarelli watching this episode?
It's so clear to me that this was a Jewish man trying to pretend to be a cool Italian boy.
Yeah, it's as a kid I bought Fonzie. I was like, yeah, Fonzie is cool. As an adult, you're like, and having seen Henry Winkler and many other things, I'm like, he is very nebbishy and kind of nerdy, guys. Like, I don't know if I buy Fonzie. But I do think there's like a charm to the world of Happy Days. There was something about with Richie and his family and Fonzie being there for Christmas where you're like, I do kind of feel an appeal to this. Like there's a hominess.
Yeah, I think it's also like the insistence of Ron Howard's character being like, we need to like invite him for Christmas. Like this is very important.
Richie is like written as such a good guy. Like you
Yeah.
can't hate Richie Cunningham.
And then it's just also this weird thing that dad is being like, it's just family.
But then like, but that's the thing with Mr. Cunningham, Tom Bosley, is he would be kind of gruff. He always was like a dollar store Walter Matthau, where he could be gruff, but there's this like heart of gold kind of thing, and he can't refuse Fonzie. He's not going to close his house off to this man. But yeah, I thought it was slow down, and so we're going to be watching for New Year's a Laverne and Shirley New Year's episode.
Okay.
And I am curious because that's coming years later. How the pacing of that show is going to feel.
Yeah.
If they will have slowed down. What the writing feels like compared to this, and so that will be an interesting thing to see in our next episode. I've never watched a full episode of Mary Tyler Moore until this thing that we did. Had you ever seen any Mary Tyler?
No, I just only had ever seen like the credits when she throws her hat in the air kind of shit.
You're gonna make it.
Yeah, like it's like I always heard this was a big deal and that like everybody loved this.
Well, there's like two things I know about it. I would always see the clip from Chuckles the Clown's funeral, which is he's like because they work in a news station, so like there's other shows in the building.
Yeah.
And apparently, I think it's Chuckles the Clown is another person. They mentioned him in this episode briefly because I think it's Gavin McLeod's character hates him.
Okay.
Or maybe it's Ted Knight's. I'm not sure. But then Chuckles dies. And I don't know if we ever saw Chuckles on screen, if he's just one of those. It's kind of like a Seinfeld thing, like Bob Sacamano or something. And so the clip I would always see is they're at the funeral and someone's giving a eulogy about Chuckles the Clown. And they all start laughing uncontrollably. And it's a mix of like the cast members genuinely laughing at how absurd all of this is. But you can't laugh because this is someone's funeral. But it's a funeral for Chuckles the Clown. That and then the clip from the very final episode where everybody comes in for a group hug with Mary. And there's a phone ringing. And they don't want to stop hugging. So they all move as one unit over to the desk. And like you see a hand reach out to grab the phone. And it is a show where Betty White comes on later as a regular cast member. Sue Ellen, I think, but plays like a bitch character in it who's like mean. And yeah, so it's watching it. I remembered how when I was a kid, I was always kind of led to believe that Mary Tyler Moore was a show for adults. Not that it was dirty or anything, but it was like, oh, as a kid, you just wouldn't enjoy it. Watching this episode, it felt like a show for babies. The plot was so simple. It wasn't bad, but it was just like Mary has to work on Christmas Day, but at least she gets Christmas Eve off. And then a coworker guilt trips her into working for him on Christmas Eve. So she ends up working on Christmas Eve. And then at the very end, 3 of the guys that work there show up and are like, we'll be here. And at midnight, we'll all go over to that guy's place and we'll have like a little Christmas party together kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that's like where the episode ends. It felt very anticlimactic.
Yeah, it did because it doesn't, first of all, I say this as if I run an HR department. Like they tell her like last minute when she's asking if she can leave early to drive home to see her family, only to be like, oh hey, no, by the way, this is a channel.
She would have known that months in advance.
Yeah, or like a few weeks in advance too. And then it's like, supposed to be like she goes and plans a Christmas Eve thing with her neighbor and friend. So they're not alone because her friend is Jewish and she doesn't celebrate Christmas, only to end up that she's going to be working that day because her coworker guilt trips her by saying that he's never spent a Christmas Eve with his family. And everyone's upset with her because they're like, you just got conned by this guy. That's what they're making her feel like, even though they're not saying he's wrong or right.
I got the vibe that Mary's character was supposed to be this like good-hearted, but ultimately a little kind of gullible and naive. But we like that about her, right? Because she's pure-hearted.
Yeah. It's weird to me because I was sold that this was like a female empowerment show.
And well, this is season 1.
Yeah, and so I think it's just all I see is a very good secretary. Question mark.
Yeah, and I don't know if she ever moves out of the secretary role. Then you have the side characters of like Rhoda, and then Phyllis, Cloris Leachman, and then Rhoda was I can't think of that actress. Valerie Harper, yeah. And they're kind of adding to the feminist aspects of the show. We don't get a lot of them. I think Phyllis is in one scene. She comes in and hides presents in the house. And then Valerie Harper's Rhoda shows up a couple times. But yeah, it felt like a really underwritten episode.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, we have an episode that's close to Christmas. Here we go.
And the one thing that I knew about it, to me, all the clips that I've ever seen, what I liked was Ted Knight as Ted Baxter, who's like the head anchor, I think, on the news. And just, I think Ted Knight is such a funny actor because he also did that show Too Close for Comfort, which is not a masterpiece by any means, but he is so funny in it. And then of course Caddyshack, well, we're waiting. He does such a good job of either playing a pompous asshole or a dumb asshole. And even in this, like the gift he gives out is the best of Ted Baxter, where he had them press a vinyl that's the best audio of his news broadcasts of that year, which is that kind of pompous but also stupid. And I think in Mary Tyler Moore, he played a more well-meaning idiot, but I didn't get enough of him. I didn't feel like we got enough of Ted. But yeah, Mary Tyler Moore, it's a show I'd give more of a chance to because I feel like, once again, Christmas episodes aren't the best way to be introduced to a show, but it did not impress me. I was impressed.
It was kind of boring.
All right. And so Cheers, we watched that for the Halloween special, and now we watched it again. This was a few years later, so we have Woody is part of the bar. Kirstie Alley's Rebecca is part of the bar. Frasier and Lilith are there. What did you think of this Cheers episode?
It was boring.
It did feel like they were just trying to come up with Christmas related plots to have characters do stuff.
And it's also it's Ted centric, like
Ted Danson,
and he's kind of boring.
He's not a great leading man.
No.
Which that's why in Curb he works better as the supporting character, because when you center him, it's just kind of like, oh, he's like a horny dude that likes to sleep with women.
Yeah.
And that's the joke. I did think it was the seeds of the modern like, especially that NBC must-see TV thing. So we're talking Seinfeld, Friends, and all the other things around it. You can really feel the seeds here. And it's not necessarily great in that I feel that Cheers is a very cynical show. And it's cynical in the way the characters speak to each other. They speak to each other with such disrespect in this show.
Well,
like nobody is nice or respects anyone.
Yeah, they're watching that.
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life, and they're like really going, ugh, the worst part, the gushy part, and they're all, pretending not to cry during it. And then it's supposed to be like Kirstie Alley announces that they need to work on Christmas Eve, and he's like, "That's a holiday." She's like, "It's a pre-holiday. Christmas is a holiday." She's like, "By the way, you'll be working time and a half." And that's when I forgot what her name is.
Rhea Perlman.
Carla, who's wearing the worst pregnant belly.
Yeah, I don't think she really was pregnant. It looked
I
bad.
think it was just a pillow stuffed under her sweater.
It was like a high school stage play.
Yeah, and then like she's like, "Oh, I'll work. That's not a problem. I'll do it. I'll do it for time and a half." And it's like this weird. It's so convoluted all over the way because it's
Well,
like,
then you had Cliff Clavin,
yeah,
who is doing the it's all the cans that he's trying to get for the food drive so
yeah,
he can go to Disney World, but the flight is literally leaving on Christmas Eve night.
yeah, and apparently he's throwing cans at the airplane.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the joke.
Well, and then you have Norm, who is it part of his work or part of like a group, like a sort of Elks Club thing or something, where they're all dressing up as Santa and kind of.
It's a part-time job besides.
So
his
it's
other
kind of like
job.
Salvation Army kind of thing. Is the
No,
what is
like
it?
they went to Santa Claus class all together.
Oh,
That's how they
okay.
knew each
Oh, okay.
other.
So it's just
The
kind of like
fact that this is embedded in my fucking brain and it was not a good
yeah, it was just like I
episode.
just remember Norm and a bunch of guys in Santa Claus costumes. Woody is in a children's play at a school. At first, I thought it was a church, but then
No,
they
it
kind of
was
talk about it as a school.
It's not a school. It's supposed to be for like a children's theater group.
Okay, but he's like one of the few adults in it. Is that what we're getting?
Like there's adults, but they do it for kids.
Like once again, not very well communicated. All Frasier does is be a bitch.
Yep.
And then
Much
Lilith.
like
What's
the real
interesting is
church.
Lilith, who I think in popular conception, we see her as the bitch, right? On Frasier, she was framed that way. She is in the Christmas spirit. She is much more like open and nice.
Yeah, she's
And
giving
it's
everyone presents.
Frasier, who's completely bitter
Yeah.
and snarling about everyone. And so, of course, yeah, you have a very convoluted plot that results in Sam thinking like it's the will they, won't they that they try to do with Rebecca that from the episodes I've seen never really worked. It was Sam and Diane. There was much more chemistry there. So we say all this about these shows, but I want to come back to the fact that these were all Christmas episodes. And now living in the year 2023 and all these shows are, over 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that these shows are projecting any sense of the realistic world and how they're presenting Christmas and families and holidays?
No.
Yeah, and I was really struck by that because, as a kid who I was living in the homeschool bubble, so I wasn't really engaging with the real world outside of my parents' filter of it.
Yeah.
These shows for me were a lot of ways to the ones that I saw to see what was going on in the world
or what to expect once you were an adult.
Yeah. And now I look at them as an adult who's experienced, multiple decades outside the purview of my parents. And they're just so phony.
Yeah.
Like everything just feels so false. Like the sentiment feels false. The characters don't really feel like anyone I've ever met. And one of my big theories I've had lately is that what's in America, a lot of people who want to belong are looking at reality television and or online influencers, things like that, YouTubers, and they're adopting personality traits of those people in order to have some sense of an identity that is both unique, quote unquote, and connected to something larger than them, but ultimately hollow. And I wonder, were our adults like that back then? Were they watching Cheers and then going to work and making snarky back and forth banter with coworkers because they were like, no, see, this is what you're supposed to do? Or because I clearly don't think they were doing Mary Tyler Moore where they were giving each other hugs. I don't think that was happening.
No.
We also had a lot more family kind of in here. Like Happy Days is a nostalgia show. So it would be comparable to something like the Goldbergs.
Yeah.
But when you look at the Goldbergs, it feels very inauthentic. It feels like it's the cartoon version of a time. And I want to go like, is Happy Days the cartoon version of the 50s?
Yeah.
I think it probably is, right? So like, what is the role of the American sitcom, right? What is its cultural role?
I have no idea anymore. Like before, it was kind of like warnings as to what could happen in life or life lessons learned in a better way. I don't know what it is beyond just entertainment.
And it does feel like because of the what's going on in Palestine, the genocide that's going on there, there's a lot of celebrities that I kind of grew up respecting for their talents. They made me laugh. I would say Seinfeld was a show that had a tremendous impact on my personal sense of humor and the types of writing that I gravitated towards. And he has been a big endorser of the IDF, which has just been nauseating. I know Jason Alexander did a thing where he read names of Jewish hostages. None of them have acknowledged what's going on to the Palestinians. And so it's gotten to the point where through all of this, there's a lot of stuff I'm just kind of giving up on. Like, I just don't think I'm going to watch Seinfeld ever again. I've seen those episodes hundreds of times. I don't need to rewatch it. It was a comfort show for me, but I don't think it will be able to provide me with that comfort anymore, knowing the beliefs of these people.
Yeah.
It's also made it where, like, the last season of Curb is coming out. I'm just not going to watch it. Like, the season before of Curb already left a bad taste in my mouth because of the way they handled underage male sexual assault. I thought was poorly handled. And the fact that they're probably going to have Cheryl Hines on Curb, and she is, campaigning with her psycho husband, Kennedy, just like, and then especially the way these people are acting, either that they don't want to acknowledge what's happening in real time, or they want to become so nasty and bitter towards fans that are calling on them to just say something like, you have this platform. What's the point of being famous if you don't use it to help people, right?
Yeah.
Money? Because if it's just money, well, then that's a very cynical thing, and well, then fuck you, right? But yeah, it was going into these Christmas episodes, I was going like, oh, maybe these will help me feel like Christmassy. And I didn't get that sense from it. I just got this sense of like, oh, that was a projection, 30 plus years ago of a world that doesn't even really exist then, and certainly doesn't exist now. And there's really not much that can be like garnered from it. There's nothing to be learned from it other than American media is full of a lot of false narratives whose purpose is to trick you into thinking that your life is broken in some way, that because your life doesn't look like this, well, then what's wrong with you? Because clearly this is real life, right?
Well, I think it's also, we're at a point that we could just say within our own lives right now, currently, Christmas is kind of canceled, right?
Yeah. And we don't have kids, and we never
don't
really
have
did
kids,
it.
We never did big celebrations, but it's understanding that at some point there is some small sense of nostalgia for it. But right now, like, if we're doing the podcast in a seasonal way, we're doing it because it's sort of like, it's themes that fill up the airspace, but it's okay if you're not in the like Christmas spirit. And if you are in the Christmas spirit, I recommend to donate to Gaza. I recommend to also join communities around you in order to create solidarity with each other, give gifts to people that can't give gifts to their own family, and don't expect anything in return for it. Don't expect a big thank you. Just be grateful that you're able to give something.
And watch The Shop Around the Corner.
It's a pretty good film.
Yeah,
I think you should watch it.
Yeah. And it's weird that The Shop Around the Corner came out in 1940, and we were watching shows from like 1956, the 70s, the 80s, and they feel like baby shit compared to that movie, right? Well, that is it for our episode. That was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links to things we talked about, including links to our website, popcult.blog. Subscribe wherever it is that you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes of the show are up. Our next episode is going to be our big end of the year, New Year's Eve special. Our favorites of the year. We'll be talking about our top 5 favorite films, and we'll be talking about our favorites from all types of other different media. We will also be kind of doing what we did with the Christmas Eve episodes, and we're going to be watching a bunch of New Year's Eve episodes of shows, which there aren't as many of those, and we picked some shows that we really like, and some are not from the United States. We've got a couple of UK shows in there as well, so we're interested to see what those are like. Well, if you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over on popcult.blog, we'd ask that you would consider supporting us on Patreon. We have lots of different levels to pick from, and we want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who both donate at the writer's room level. At that level, you get to pick one movie a month for us to watch and review on the blog, and if you wish, you can even include some of your own thoughts in that review when it goes published. If you join as a patron, you will also get access to patron-exclusive podcasts that we do, sort of little 6-episode mini-series type things. Right now, we are coming up on the end of Screenplay, which was our first attempt to do a GM-less co-op tabletop role-play game, where we took the Ironsworn mechanics, which are very modular and easy to adapt to any genre, came up with a world, came up with main characters, came up with some NPCs and a conflict, and we have been developing that story as we play and having a lot of fun doing it. I am excited to know how it ends. Well, until next time, if you keep listening, we'll keep watching.